What happens when an entire culture saves money like their survival depends on it? While most of us celebrate managing to save $5 out of every 100 we earn, there's a nation of over a billion people quietly putting away $36 from that same 100. This isn't just impressive. This is a complete reimagining of what's possible with money. Today, we're diving deep into the financial psychology that has created some of the most disciplined savers in human history. These aren't people with special advantages or secret government programs. These are ordinary families who have developed extraordinary habits that could transform your relationship with money forever. But here's what makes this story fascinating. This extreme saving behavior isn't just driven by fear or desperation. It's built on principles so logical and systematic that once you understand them, your current approach to money might start feeling completely backwards. By the way, my name is Tim, and on this channel, I help you actually understand how money works in real life, so you can make smarter decisions with your income, savings, and investments. If you want your money to stop stressing you out and start working for you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next episodes. Let me start with a number that should make everyone question everything they think they know about personal finance. The average household in China saves 36% of their income, not $36, 36%. While Americans are struggling to save 5%, Chinese families are routinely setting aside more than 1/3 of everything they earn. This isn't a recent trend or some temporary economic phenomenon. China's national savings rate has averaged nearly 46% for decades. Through wars, economic upheavals, massive social changes, and rapid modernization, Chinese families have consistently saved a huge portion of their income. During their peak saving years around 2008, they were setting aside over 50% of everything they earned. Think about that for a moment. Imagine keeping 50 cents of every dollar that comes through your door. Your emergency fund would be fully loaded within months. Your retirement would be more secure. Those financial stress headaches that keep you up at night would become distant memories. Now, before you dismiss this as some cultural anomaly that only works in a different economic system, let me tell you about individuals who have taken these principles to their absolute extreme. There are people saving 90% of their salary year after year. They live on just 10% of what they earn, and the results are staggering. These aren't trust fund babies or cryptocurrency millionaires. These are regular, working people who own multiple properties in expensive cities, all funded through pure saving discipline. When their stories hit social media, hundreds of millions of people tune in to learn their methods. That level of interest tells you everything about how seriously this culture takes financial discipline. So what's the secret? How do entire families live on fractions of their income while still maintaining decent quality of life? The answer lies in a fundamental shift in how money decisions get made. At the heart of this saving culture is something called the 10-to-1 principle. The goal is spending just 1 unit of currency for every 10 you earn. That's a 90% savings rate that would make financial advisors break into cold sweats. Even when people aim for this extreme target and only achieve 50 or 60%, they're still saving more than most people earn. This isn't about being cheap or depriving yourself of everything enjoyable. It's about fundamentally changing your relationship with money. When you grow up believing that you should live on 10% of your income, every spending decision gets filtered through a completely different lens. That daily coffee habit that costs $5 suddenly seems absurd when you realize it represents half your entire daily living allowance. And here's the key part. You don't have to hit 90% for this to work in your life. If you're currently saving 5%, what would your life look like if you pushed that to 15 or 20% for the next 90 days? Just asking that question forces your brain to think in a completely different way about what's really necessary and what's negotiable. But the 10-to-1 principle is just the foundation. The real breakthrough comes from something called zero-based budgeting, and it's so simple that it's almost embarrassing how effective it can be. Here's how it works. At the beginning of every month, you take your entire income and assign every single dollar a specific job before you spend anything. Not one penny goes unaccounted for. Your rent gets assigned, your groceries get assigned, your transportation costs get assigned. But here's the crucial difference. Your savings get assigned first, before anything else. Most people save whatever's left over after they've paid all their bills and bought whatever caught their eye that month. Chinese families flip this completely upside down. They pay their savings first, then figure out how to live on what remains. Let's say you earn $4,000 a month. In a zero-based budget, you might assign $1,000 to savings and investments right off the top. Then you have $3,000 left to cover rent, food, transportation, and everything else. This forces you to be creative and disciplined with your spending because the money for savings has already been spoken for. The psychological impact of this approach cannot be overstated. When you treat savings as your first and most important expense, it stops being optional. It becomes as essential as paying your rent or buying groceries. You wouldn't skip your rent payment because you saw a nice pair of shoes. So why would you skip your savings payment for the same reason? This zero-based approach also eliminates one of the biggest wealth killers in modern culture, lifestyle inflation. You know what I'm talking about. You get a raise, and suddenly your expenses mysteriously increase to match your new income. You're still living paycheck to paycheck, just with nicer stuff. Chinese families avoid this trap by allocating any income increases to savings before they can get used to spending the extra money. When that promotion comes through, the additional income gets assigned to wealth building before it can disappear into upgraded restaurants and fancier gadgets. Now, you might be wondering if this extreme approach to saving requires living like a monk and never enjoying anything. That's where another fundamental principle comes into play, the surgical distinction between needs and wants. Chinese culture has developed an almost mathematical precision when it comes to identifying what you actually need versus what marketing has convinced you that you want. Take smartphones, for example. You need a device that can make calls, send messages, and access the internet. Do you need the latest model with the titanium frame and professional camera system that costs more than some people's monthly rent? Probably not. A Chinese approach would be to buy a reliable phone that meets your actual needs and invest the difference. That extra $500 or $1,000 could be working for you instead of sitting in a corporation's bank account. This doesn't mean Chinese families never spend money on things they enjoy. It means they're incredibly strategic about when and how they splurge. If they're going to spend money on something they want rather than need, it better provide exceptional long-term value. That expensive wallet better last for years. Those quality shoes better be resolable and durable. Every purchase gets evaluated not just for its immediate utility, but for its cost per use over time. Chinese culture has also mastered something that Western consumer culture actively fights against: delayed gratification. While we're bombarded with messages about treating ourselves and living for today, Chinese culture celebrates the ability to wait for better opportunities. This patience allows them to avoid impulse purchases that drain savings accounts and accumulate debt. Speaking of debt, here's another fundamental difference that explains Chinese saving success. In many Chinese families, debt is viewed with suspicion and avoided whenever possible. The idea of financing a car or putting a vacation on a credit card seems borderline insane. If you can't afford to pay cash for something, the default assumption is that you can't afford it at all. This cash-first mentality forces families to save for purchases in advance rather than borrowing against future income. It might take longer to buy that car or take that vacation, but when you finally do, you own it outright. No monthly payments, no interest charges, no stress about making ends meet if your income drops unexpectedly. The anti-debt philosophy also eliminates one of the biggest obstacles to saving that plague Western households. When you're not making car payments, credit card payments, and personal loan payments every month, you have a lot more money available for savings. The average American household carries over $9,000 in credit card debt alone. Imagine how much you could save if that money wasn't going to interest payments every month. But here's where Chinese savings strategy gets really fascinating, and it's something that would make most financial advisors question everything they thought they knew about money management. Chinese families have turned education into their ultimate investment strategy, and the numbers behind this approach are absolutely staggering. When Chinese parents start saving for their children's education, they're not just setting aside money for college tuition, they're viewing every dollar spent on education as a potential return on investment that will compound for generations. This isn't just a feel-good philosophy about the value of learning. This is cold, hard financial calculation that treats education like one of the highest yield assets available. Think about it this way. If you invest $100,000 in education for your child and that education increases their lifetime earning potential by just $50,000 per year, you've created a return that would make most investors jealous. Over a 30-year career, that's $1.5 million in additional income from a $100,000 investment. It's not a guaranteed outcome, but it illustrates why families are willing to sacrifice so much for education. This educational investment strategy explains why some families are willing to live very simply while spending thousands on tutoring, language classes, and test preparation. They're not being cheap with themselves and generous with their kids. They're making calculated financial decisions based on long-term wealth building that spans generations. Demographics have also amplified this effect. In certain periods, policies and population trends created imbalances in the number of men and women in younger age groups. When you have more men competing for fewer women, financial stability and assets like homeownership can become a major competitive advantage in the dating market. Young men quickly realized that having a substantial savings account wasn't just about financial security, it was about increasing their chances of starting a family. This created what some economists describe as a savings arms race, where men competed to accumulate wealth faster than their peers. Whether or not you agree with the pressure this creates, the result was an entire generation taking saving extremely seriously. This competition extended beyond just having money in the bank. Many families developed the expectation that men should own property before getting married. Not just rent an apartment, not just have good credit, but actually own real estate. This requirement forced an entire generation of young men to become hyper-focused savers because homeownership became a prerequisite for starting a family. Now, before you start feeling sorry for people having to save so aggressively just to find a partner, remember that this cultural pressure also created some incredibly strong financial habits. These savers developed disciplines in their 20s that would serve them well for the rest of their lives. They learned to delay gratification, prioritize long-term goals over short-term pleasures, and view every purchase through the lens of opportunity cost. The structure of the social safety net also plays a huge role in saving behavior. While China does have social programs, many families feel they cannot rely on them to the same extent that some Western households rely on government benefits, so they treat personal savings as their real safety net. Most Americans assume they'll receive Social Security benefits, Medicare coverage, and unemployment insurance if things go wrong. Chinese families are more likely to assume that in the end, it's on them and their family network. They know that every dollar they don't save today could mean the difference between dignity and desperation in old age. This awareness creates a sense of urgency around saving that's hard to replicate in countries where people feel more buffered by public systems. The healthcare factor alone is enough to motivate extreme saving behavior. Medical emergencies can be financially devastating without adequate savings. This reality makes that emergency fund seem less like a nice-to-have and more like life insurance you pay yourself. But here's where Chinese saving culture gets really interesting from a psychological perspective. They've managed to flip the entire narrative around money and happiness that dominates Western thinking. While Americans are constantly told that money can't buy happiness, and that experiences matter more than savings accounts, Chinese culture often celebrates financial discipline as a virtue that brings peace of mind and family security. This cultural difference shows up in how families talk about money around the dinner table. American kids often hear their parents stress about bills, complain about not having enough money, and treat financial discussions as negative experience. Chinese children are more likely to grow up hearing their parents plan purchases months in advance, celebrate reaching savings milestones, and discuss money as a tool for achieving family goals. The result is that many kids develop a completely different emotional relationship with money. Instead of viewing saving as deprivation, they see it as empowerment. Instead of feeling restricted by budgets, they feel secure knowing exactly where every dollar is going. This psychological foundation makes high saving rates feel more natural rather than torturous. Chinese culture has also developed strategies for dealing with what psychologists call decision fatigue. When you're trying to save aggressively, every purchase becomes a decision point that requires willpower. Buy the expensive shampoo or the cheap one. Eat out tonight or cook at home. Take the taxi or walk. Rather than relying on willpower for every decision, many families create systems that eliminate most of these choices. They shop at the same stores, buy the same brands, and follow the same routines week after week. This automation reduces the mental energy required to stick to their savings goals and prevents impulse purchases that could derail their progress. The concept of social reputation also often works in favor of savings rather than against it. In American culture, displaying wealth through expensive cars, clothes, and gadgets can increase your social status. In many Chinese communities, being known as someone who saves money and makes smart financial decisions carries more weight than showing off luxury purchases. This social dynamic means that peer pressure actually supports saving behavior rather than undermining it. When your neighbors respect you more for driving a 10-year-old car that's paid off than they would for financing a luxury vehicle, it becomes much easier to make financially responsible choices. Chinese families have also mastered the art of finding joy in simple pleasures that don't cost much money. Family dinners at home become social events. Walking in parks replaces expensive entertainment. Playing cards or board games substitutes for costly nights out. These aren't desperate measures taken by people who can't afford better options. They're conscious choices made by families who understand that happiness doesn't require constant spending. This ability to find satisfaction in low-cost activities isn't just about saving money in the moment. It's about developing a lifestyle that can be sustained even during economic downturns or unexpected financial challenges. When your happiness doesn't depend on expensive restaurants, designer clothes, or luxury vacations, you become remarkably resilient to financial stress. The compound effect of all these cultural factors creates saving rates that seem impossible to many Americans, but feel completely natural to these families. When saving is viewed as honorable rather than restrictive, when every purchase is evaluated for long-term value, when peer pressure supports financial discipline rather than consumption. And when happiness comes from simple pleasures rather than expensive indulgences, achieving a 40 or 50% savings rate stops being a superhuman feat and starts being a much more realistic outcome. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Chinese saving culture is how they've weaponized something that would make most Americans break out in hives. Complete financial transparency within the family. I'm not talking about occasionally checking in on the budget. I'm talking about every family member knowing, at least in broad terms, how much money comes in, where it goes, and what the long-term financial goals are for the entire household. This level of financial openness creates something remarkable. When your teenage son knows that the family is saving for his college education and can see exactly how much progress you're making each month, he's less likely to ask for expensive sneakers. When your spouse understands that skipping restaurant meals for 2 months means you can fully fund your emergency account, the sacrifice stops feeling like deprivation and starts feeling like teamwork. American families often treat money conversations like state secrets. Parents whisper about bills when kids leave the room. Couples argue about spending behind closed doors, and nobody really knows if the family is on track financially or heading for disaster. Chinese families flip this completely around. Money becomes a family project where everyone understands their role and contribution. This transparency also eliminates one of the biggest sources of financial stress in Western households: the mystery of where money goes. You know that feeling when you check your bank account and wonder how you spent $800 last month with nothing to show for it? Families that track every dollar never experience that confusion because every transaction gets recorded, discussed, and evaluated against shared goals. The tracking system they use would make accountants weep with joy. We're not talking about rough estimates or occasional check-ins. In many households, people know their spending categories down to very fine detail, and they review these numbers regularly, like a board of directors examining quarterly reports. This might sound obsessive, but it's actually incredibly liberating. When you know exactly where your money goes, you gain control over it. That mysterious leak in your budget gets plugged. Those unconscious spending habits get exposed and corrected. The financial anxiety that comes from uncertainty disappears because uncertainty itself gets eliminated through meticulous tracking. Chinese money management gets really clever here, and it's something that would probably revolutionize a lot of household finances if we could swallow our pride long enough to implement it. They've mastered the art of making saving money feel like winning a game rather than suffering through punishment. Implementing these saving strategies might seem overwhelming at first. Going from saving 3% to 36% doesn't happen overnight. And you don't need to start eating rice and beans every meal to make progress. The beauty of these principles is that even applying part of them will put you miles ahead of where you are now. So here's a simple way to start. Month 1, track every dollar. Not to judge yourself, just to see reality. Month 2, build a zero-based budget and pay yourself first with at least 10%, even if it feels tight. Month 3, pick one area to go Chinese level strict on, maybe phones, eating out, or clothes, and route all the savings into investments or debt payoff. Start with zero-based budgeting. Track every dollar for 1 month and see where your money actually goes. You'll probably discover you're spending more on random stuff than you thought. Then gradually increase your savings rate. If you're currently saving 5%, aim for 10% next month. Once that feels comfortable, push for 15%. Remember, this isn't about depriving yourself of everything fun. It's about being intentional with your money so you can have the life you actually want instead of the life your impulses create. The Chinese have figured out something that most of us are still learning. True financial freedom comes from controlling your money, not from your money controlling you. The psychological shift happens when you stop seeing money as something that flows through your hands and start seeing it as something you direct with purpose. Every dollar becomes a soldier in your army, and you get to decide which battles they fight. When you assign your money jobs before you spend it, when you distinguish between genuine needs and manufactured wants, when you treat saving as paying yourself first, something fundamental changes in your relationship with wealth. You stop being a victim of your financial circumstances and start being the architect of your financial future. Whether you implement the 10-to-1 rule, embrace zero-based budgeting, or just start distinguishing more clearly between your needs and wants, you're taking steps toward a financial future that most people never reach. And who knows, maybe in a few years, you'll be the one saving 40% of your income while your friends wonder how you make it look so easy. The secret isn't magical, it isn't complicated, and it doesn't require special talents or lucky breaks. It just requires a willingness to think differently about money than most people around you. If you found this breakdown helpful and you want more videos that actually explain how money works in the real world, feel free to subscribe and share this with someone who needs a little push to start paying themselves first.